Welcome to Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen within your relationships, within your work, and most importantly, within the relationship with yourself. In this podcast, we talk about all things self-love, relationships, sexuality, spirituality, and more. Hi, I'm your host, Celia Antonio, and I'm a women's self-love coach, mindfulness expert, and a multifaceted being here for your most grounded and expansive self-expression. You can connect with me on Instagram at self-expressbabe, and for my guest episodes, there will always be links in the show notes to find them online. I give my deepest thanks to you for being here and spending time with me today. Now let's begin our journey. Yay, welcome Caitlin. I'm so excited to have you on Openly Spoken today. And for everyone that is listening, I'm going to introduce Caitlin to you today. So Caitlin Rose is a creatrix, a photographer, a facilitator, and an intuitive. And after spending 10 plus years immersed in the world of creative arts, branding, and marketing, and 3+ years in Neo-Tantra and Embodiment spaces, she now works one-on-one with female-bodied humans to support them to connect deeper to their bodies, their creativity, their sensuality, and to their own unique essence through their chosen craft of photography, design, coaching, and workshops. And from all of that, it sounds like creativity is such a big medicine for you and like a big medicine that you share with your clients.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, take 2 of our recording.
It's gonna work.
It's gonna work. The internet gods are on our side.
They are.
Yeah. So one of the kind of like main things I wanted to touch on today is, I guess, like the paradoxes within polarity and like what is taught within realms of Tantra, Neo-Tantra, as far as like the 2 poles of like, this is what's masculine and this is what's feminine. Because when we connected on our connection call, you shared with me that you came out and you learned about Neo-Tantra and that like confused you, and then you went back into the closet. So I would love to hear again about that journey and yeah, anything that you want to share for people that are listening.
Yeah, totally. I've been on quite a journey with my sexuality for the last few years. I came out as a lesbian when I was 14 and was like out for like over 10 years. I had multiple long-term relationships, was like super confident in that. Obviously, there's like quite a lot of things that come along with that, especially with coming out that young. You know, I wasn't like accepted very well by my family, super religious, all of that jazz. However, was like super solid in it, but I was like getting super sick of the like drama that was going on with the women I was dating. And obviously now I understand that I'm just creating most of that. But I made a like conscious decision. I was like, right, I'm done. Like, I'm just going to go and be with men for a bit. Right. And so I was like, this was like before I even knew what Tantra was, before I even knew what spirituality was, to be honest. It was about 8 years ago. And so I was just with men. I moved to England. I let go of this whole lesbian identity. I was like just dating men. Never had a boyfriend though. Like I'm obviously gay, but I like never had that like really emotional like intimacy with men. It was just like fun and playful and light, which was perfect. I moved back to Australia in 2019, and I discovered Neo-Tantra and spirituality and kind of everything that year, to be honest. And that's obviously like pushed me to where I am now with Vita. But I think like it wasn't always at the start, but it was like gradually over like the last 3 years, I got really deep into the like polarity teachings of Tantra and Neo-Tantra, and like I took on
Mm.
this belief that I had to be this like surrendered, soft, like feminine woman in order to like attract this like embodied masculine man. And like I pretty much like felt like that I needed to do that in order to be like happy and fulfilled, right? Obviously the
Mm.
inner union starts first, which I've kind of discovered through Vita more so. But I've also
Yeah,
discovered that um, that's actually not my truth, and I'm actually gay. So I'm
I love it.
yeah, it's taken like quite a bit to unravel all of that, and I feel like I still am. But um, what kind of triggered that is I moved back to my home city, and about the end of last year, and I just started to little rainbow emoji.
I don't know if it'll record the rainbow emoji, but there's one right up here.
It does. Um, yeah, so we moved back to my like home state at the end of last year, and I literally like started to feel like I wanted to be with women again. It was like I hadn't really had that for the last few years, and it just started to like trickle back in. And then I moved.
Mm.
I did a house sit in Melbourne on the same street as where I lived before I went to England, so it was like full circle. And
Oh.
on in that street, like I was like literally living my like lesbian life, right? So all these like memories came back, and I started to like reconnect with all of the like lesbian friends that I had back then. And I had all this grief that I had to process around like, fuck, I've
Mhm.
actually like pushed the truth of who I am, or an aspect of who I am, so far down over the last few years that I feel so sad about that, you know, like, so I had to process quite a lot around that. And I feel like I'm still kind of unraveling what, how
Mhm.
all of that looks to me. Like, I think through Vita, I love that Layla's very like gender neutral in like how she speaks about things. And I think that as a society, we have labeled what things are as far as feminine and masculine, which can be like obviously necessary in some ways as far as like men and women, but I don't think as far as like, you know, emotions being feminine and like presence being masculine. I feel like there's a lot of distortion
Mhm.
within that. And I think
Yeah.
that in letting go of that within myself, I've just allowed myself to just be who I fucking am without needing to be this surrendered woman, whatever that means.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that you bring that up because, like, for me, I've been on this journey of in the last 3 years of answering the question of like, what does divine feminine mean? And it's true that a lot of people that teach about what is feminine and what is masculine, they'll have like this list of like presence is masculine, space holding is feminine. Like, I don't know if space holding is what it is, but like they'll be like, this is masculine and this is feminine, when really like everything is both
Yes,
and none of it.
exactly.
Like it's all just us. Like, I think so you mentioned Vita a few times, and I just want to share for the people listening, Vita is the name of a coaching certification program that we're both in, and that's where we met. And I think something that's illustrated very well in the program, I think it was in our first trimester when we were working on the self-development work still, there was a lecture where she talked about how within society we have all these like labels and definition of like what a woman is, and really like all of that means nothing, because we all, I was going to say the word should, but I guess I try not to use that word, but I think it makes sense. We all should have the sovereignty and the freedom to decide what is like what that means for us specifically. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And even if you're not, even if you're like gender fluid, like you have the power within yourself to decide what that is for you. It doesn't have to fit into the boxes that other people who came before you are like, this is what gender fluid is, this is what being a man is, this is what being a woman is. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, it
So
is like another form of like boxing you in, right? And like I fully
yeah.
am behind like identities. Like I feel like we do need identities in society to like I guess label things or like understand things, but also if you can like move beyond that, that's like where the liberation is. Because it's like I've been really exploring lately like what I identify as queer now, but I'm kind of like, well, what is queer? Like queer to me is like I'm fluid in my sexual expression. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm always like with women. I feel like queer to me feels like, and it kind of feels like an openness to everybody in the LGBTQ plus community. It's like, yeah, but I'm really in that right now, like exploring like what that looks like. And I've just recently like met a trans woman. And so I'm like really understanding like their journey through all of that. And like, yeah, like I'm just being really curious around, you know, I've definitely seen a few people in the Tantra world online say things that, you know, trans women aren't women. And I'm just like, I don't agree with that, but I'm kind of wanting to go more into that to see, like, to understand their journey, right? Like, I'm not in that, so I can't possibly know what they're going through, but I like really want to understand it and form my own opinion around all of that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's so funny the timing of this because I had a conversation with someone yesterday for a membership that I was thinking of joining, and they have like this vetting process where they sit down and talk with you and share their community values. And like the very first thing they shared was that this is a space for biological women, and like when we say women, we know what that means. And the person said that like, you know, basically that they said that trans women, they don't see trans women as women. And I was just like, whoa, like when they asked me how that landed, I was like, it doesn't land good for me. Like my heart is beating fast. Like it's just so, it's such a different view. And with your piece about wanting to understand it, I do think that it is important to have spaces with, you know, like this is a space only for biological men, or this is a space only for trans men, or this is a space only for trans women. This is a space only for biological women. I think that that is important. And I think we have to be very careful with how we, I guess, like demonize people. Like it just like that stance doesn't seem very kind to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that there is quite a strong, both sides, for lack of a better term, polarity within, I guess, these communities with like their beliefs around all of this. And like I've unfollowed a lot of like people that I would have, I guess, really resonated with over the last few years within this space because they've put posts up saying like, trans women aren't women, and I'm like, well, I don't actually agree with that anymore, you know. So I like went through and culled like a whole bunch of people because I was like, actually that doesn't feel loving or inclusive to me, especially when, you know, the essence of Neo-Tantra is to love all parts of self, right? And like coming from this like unconditional love in a way. So it's like, well, that just seems like a complete cop out to me. Obviously they're entitled to their opinion and that's their journey, like you know, everyone's on their own path with all this stuff, but yeah, it's not something that I resonate with anymore.
Yeah, I love what you just mentioned about like especially within Neo-Tantra, that it's all about loving all the parts of the self. And I kind of want to go back to your story a little bit because you mentioned that you came out when you were 14, and then you were at this point where you were kind of like tired of the drama that you didn't know you were creating. So so when you moved, you were dating men and it was, you know, very light and fun. So but that happened before finding Neo-Tantra, right? So I would love to know what is it that I would love to know? I would love to know like what was it being in this space that was like so, I guess, against your truth and identity that pulled you towards Tantra?
I think that I discovered Tantra at a time when I was like really open to like discovering like what else is out there, because I'd only kind of had my spiritual awakening about 6 months before that. And so I was very in that like wow, like I've discovered this whole other world that I didn't know was out there. So I met one of my friends, still one of my best friends now, who was like studying at the time in the Tantra space. And I remember her saying to me, like, I was so scared of sexual energy at that point. I was just like, nah, like I'm not here for that. She's like, it's just creative energy. Like she was so chill about it. And then yeah, I don't think at that point I was as far into the whole I have to be with a man to feel whole. I was just in the like, I was still open to where my sexuality was kind of leading me at that point. Like I was like, like I've had some like cool times with men over the last couple of years, nothing like serious, but I'm not like against being with women at that point. And I was with a woman around that time as well. Like I was still like quite open to it. But I think when I got into the tantric space over the like 3 years that I was in it, in like this certain community up there, I got like deeper and deeper into that, like I need to be with a man to feel whole kind of mindset. And so it was like a gradual thing for me.
Yeah. So then taking on that belief of like I need a masculine man to feel whole. I can see how, even if you weren't dating men, like it probably could have been like, I need to date a woman who presents masculine, like whatever that means. And I would love to know, like, when did you figure out that was just somebody else's truth that you no longer aligned with? Like, what was that point? Take us through that journey. I'm so curious.
I think that was also gradual. I think last year there was like, I started to feel this like inner part of me that was like not in resonance to a lot of the like people or the teachings that I had been on so deep in over the past couple of years, right? And it wasn't just like a one day that was it. It was like there was just like a misalignment kind of happening internally. And so I started just like pulling away from like a lot of that and not going to as many events and stuff. And I think there was also a part of me that was like, I have been actively dating men for the last couple of years, like on the apps and stuff, but I was like, I'm not getting anywhere. What is wrong with me? That's kind of where I was at. Like, I actually thought there was something wrong with me. Like I was watching all my friends around me get with like men, and end up in these like serious relationships. And I was like, I've never had a boyfriend. Like what is going on? So there was like, all of this was kind of starting to, I guess, bubble up in my head. And then when I was like driving back from Queensland to Victoria, I was like noticing this desire for women coming back in. So I think it was like a culmination of like, that might actually be, I might actually be gay. That might be what is wrong with me and why I haven't had a boyfriend over the past few years, So I think it wasn't like one pivotal thing. But then what happened is I completely polarized when I got back to Victoria and was just like, I'm not doing anything in any of this realm anymore because I need to find what is my truth within this, right? And I think Vita's obviously like the only thing that I have done this year. And I've started going to more like queer spaces. And I think I'm kind of coming back into it a little bit more now. Like I'm looking into going to some like queer kink events and some like queer temples and running queer temples in Melbourne. So I'm like still, I guess, figuring out where I feel like I belong in these and how we can bring all of the worlds together and make them more inclusive and open. And like, as an example, I'm running an event in Queensland in 2 months. And normally when I've ran sacred sexuality temples, I've had like the partnered exercises have been man or woman, right? And now I'm like, no, open gender, everyone's playing with everybody. If you have a problem with that, don't come. Like that's where my space is now.
I love that, because that's how it should be. Because one of the like defining things for me, at least, that I've gotten from Tantra is that we're not defined by these labels. We're not defined. We are not our body. We are like, we're something beyond. Like we're all, if we're all one, then the separation of like this gender and that gender and that gender and this identity and that identity is actually all an illusion. So I love that you're creating the space to play with that. And I think you bring up a very great point when you illustrated that as you were in these spaces, you started to feel this like internal misalignment. And I kind of wanted to mirror that back because I think when we feel that internal message of like, this isn't right and this isn't actually truth, when we are in spaces that are spiritual or that are like for self-development, sometimes it could be very easy to kind of gaslight those feelings and to kind of rationalize it as like, oh, I didn't meditate enough or whatever. Like I didn't do X, Y, and Z things that my teacher or spiritual guide or guru or whoever told me to do. And within Tantra and any self-development space, it's not, I feel like it's never the essential teaching that, or maybe it is, I don't know. Sometimes it's not the essential teaching that pulls us away from truth. It's how whoever is presenting it to us, whether it's like a book or a course or the leader of a temple, like however they are, because they're reading these teachings or receiving these teachings through their own filter. And then they're sharing it after it's gone through their filter. They're sharing it in a certain way that they perceive it to be true. And yeah, I think it's very important to leave space for things like that to kind of like to allow everyone to digest it and interpret it in their own way.
Totally.
And,
Yeah. And that's why I love like how Layla speaks about it, because it's like, you can bring the gender neutral into it and you can like perceive it how you like. And I think that even this like simple, might not be simple to some people, but this simple like idea of like God and goddess, to me, that's like binary, like gender binary, basically. So I've been through Vita and the space that is in that to explore what it means to me. I've been connecting with God X, which like to me is like not is gender neutral, right? And it's like, to me, it feels like there's God, goddess, and God X. And so I've been like, I guess I've been connecting with God and goddess over the past couple of years. And so now I'm like, well, what does it mean to connect with a God that is like above all of that? And like that to me feels like the evolution of like where things are going. And I view a lot of people that, I view trans and like non-binary people as like more evolved in consciousness, because it's like they've moved beyond what it means to be a man or a woman, and they're finding their own like space in that, right? So yeah, it's quite a journey finding like how I can bring Tantra into the world in a way that feels like my truth, and keeping it open for people to find theirs within that.
Yeah. Are there any particular pieces within Tantra? There might be a lot, but whichever you feel called to share that really do resonate with you.
I mean, bringing everything back to the body and your own body and everything happening internally is like, everything. It's the foundation for me with all of this work. So I think like, like I still believe that we have an inner masculine and feminine. I wanted to say this before, like throughout Vita, I've been like, cool, I'm just going to like journey with myself and see what is my truth here. Right. And so with the, we have a couple, I'll explain it for the people that don't know on the podcast. We have a couple of modules that were like healing the family dynamic, which is like our inner feminine masculine, as well as our like parents. Right. So within that module that we completed, like I definitely connected with like my inner mother and my inner father. And so like I still feel like we have these energies inside of us. And I do feel like they sit for me on like the right sides, as like Sandra would describe them as. But that was me having my own experience of that. That wasn't me being like, this has to be here. It was like, I actually do feel like my inner mother on my left side, which is supposed to be the feminine side. So like I've let my
Mm.
body and my experience shape like how I feel about all of that. So I think coming back to the body is like pivotal in everything.
Yeah, I love that. And everything that you just shared sparked for me to play with. And I hope that other people who do identify as either man or woman will try this on with me to connect with a non-binary sense of like source or godex, or maybe like a parental figure rather than it being necessarily a mother or a father. I feel like that'd be so interesting. That's not something I ever thought to connect with, and I'm very curious like what would come up if I did that. So thank you for
Totally.
sharing that.
Welcome. Yeah, just letting go of like what I would call the societal conditioning around like gendered higher power, whatever you want to call it, North Star, and just like
Yeah.
allowing that to present its wisdom to you. The vision that I get when I haven't told anybody this before. What the vision that I get when I connect to God X is literally like a man dressed in drag. Because that to me is the
Oh my God, I
ultimate,
love it.
like I'm obsessed with drag queens, so I'm not surprised. But it's like the ultimate like non-binary like human, right? They're just like they're everything, they're all in one.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so fun. Um, yeah, so I'm really loving this conversation because like learning about what divine feminine is really helped me at some point. And through being in Vita and maybe like a little bit before, like I have learned how these labels can be very limiting and non-inclusive. Um, because the thing is, the way that it was presented to me and the way I've even, presented it in my own content and with my own like clients and even on this podcast, is that we live in a world that's like masculine dominated. And I'm doing air quotes for those of you listening to just the audio. It's quote masculine dominated. And what I mean when I say that is that like there's this emphasis on like work and producing and exploiting resources from earth, um kind of like, yeah, just like doing and like living in our heads rather than dropping into the body.
Mm.
And then when I discovered like what is quote divine feminine, the way it was presented to me was like that divine feminine work is all about dropping into the body. So when I discovered that, that was helpful for me at the time because that was what I needed. But where I stand now is like, who's to say that dropping into your body is feminine or masculine?
It just
It's
is,
just dropping
right?
into the body.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I so agree with that.
And that's the funny thing about like being human and having, prefrontal cortexes. We want to label everything.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, that like sometimes labels are helpful. I think we just have to kind of be careful of how much importance we put on external truths over our internal truths. What would you
Definitely.
say?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that for me, like I had a similar journey with that whole like, oh, I discovered that I was obviously like working too hard and not being enough, which I like agree with still. I feel like there's balance. I'm also a Libra, so I always come back to balance. Like, what's out of balance? Am I like doing too much? Am I not resting enough? But again, it doesn't need to be, I'm way too much in my masculine. It's like, well, actually, I'm just like pushing myself a little bit too hard than I
Yeah.
I should be. Like I'm not listening to my body enough. And that doesn't mean that I'm not in my feminine enough. Like I'm not surrendered enough. It's like literally like you said, we aren't necessarily designed to be like doing as much as like society has created. Like I don't agree with the 9 to 5 hustle, grind, all of that. Like, but that doesn't mean that it
Yeah.
doesn't need to be masculine or feminine within all of
Yeah.
that. But I think I can't remember what your question was now. I just went on a tangent.
Yeah, I think we've both kind of been going on tangents. I don't think I asked you a question. I think I just mentioned like about like not putting external truths on a pedestal above your internal truths.
Definitely. Yeah. And it just
Yeah.
comes back to listening to your body, right? Like I've been like quite fatigued the last couple of weeks, and it's like it's because I have been in my mind too much. Like I've had to make a lot of decisions around like moving out and business and travel and all the things. So it's like it was just a case of like not being in my body enough. But also that can be like a also just as like bad, right? Because I remember last year I was just like, oh, I'm not getting anywhere because I'm not in my feminine enough. Like I'm not doing enough like practices, practices. And I've even kind of been a little bit like that with Vita, but it's like actually just shifting from like, I need to do this in order to feel better into the like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit like out of balance. What does my body need? Oh, I just need to go and do some breath work to like shift some of the energy in my body. And then I can like get on with my day. It doesn't have to be this like half a day practice every day doing like tantric practices. It's like it can just be like a simple thing to tune into whenever you are feeling a bit out of whack,
Yeah. Yeah. A little message that has kept on coming up for me as of lately is like simple is so potent. So potent.
Yes.
And simple, by the way, does not mean it's easy.
No. No.
Doing breath work for 10 minutes, even though it's just 10 minutes, it can bring up a lot. It could be very hard, but that 10 minutes is worth it.
Totally. And it just allows you to like come back to your body. And I like even in that 10-minute breath work, like I'm generally processing like quite a lot. And so it can still be quite a lot, like you said, a lot of emotion or energy there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a couple of questions that I usually ask guests at the end, and I'm feeling called to bring those in and see like what else that brings up within this conversation. So the first one is, what does self-love mean to you?
Self-love is like literally accepting myself in like everything that I do. And it's definitely still a work in progress for me. Like that's like literally the choices that I make, how I feel about my body, how I'm showing up, like what I'm not doing, like loving myself and literally like all of that. And that's been like definitely dropping in as like, let's bring a little bit more of that into your life. The last couple of days, my boss bought me a bracelet and it's supposed to be like literally to help you manifest more self-love. So I'm like,
Oh,
okay,
nice.
I'm listening.
Is it rose quartz?
I don't actually know.
It looks like it.
It looks a little bit more purple.
Yeah.
I've got a card on it somewhere.
Okay. That's cute. That's nice to give you that gift.
Yeah.
To manifest more love.
Yeah.
And the next question is, what makes you feel the most grounded?
Or sitting on the beach with my feet in the sand, which I have not done in a while because it's been winter in Australia. So, but I'm doing a house sit right near the beach. So I'm like, I'm going to do that this weekend. Just like looking
Nice.
out to the ocean, like just connected to all of it.
Yeah. I didn't realize until maybe like 2 years ago that in Australia, the seasons are like reversed to America.
Yeah.
I like learned that, I think, during the pandemic.
I love that that wasn't even that long ago.
Yeah, it was so recently. Which, by the way, when you were sharing your story that you started discovering like Neo-Tantra and had your awakening in 2019, in my mind I'm like, oh, just in time for the lockdown where you can't go anywhere.
Literally. And I just like created like all this stuff, like online courses. I ran like workshops just before everything shut down. Like it was insane timing. And I also got back to Australia, I think 6 months before everything shut down. So I'm like so grateful.
Yeah, because Australia they had their borders closed for like 2 years, right? Or a year at
Yeah,
least. It's a
yeah.
while.
it was quite a while, and the state borders were also closed. Like I was living in the top of Australia, and I couldn't get back down to my family in Victoria because they were shut.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a friend who went to high school with me here, and she went to Australia during the pandemic and got stuck there for 2 years.
Oh
So
my
that's
God.
why.
Where was she though?
Oh, I don't remember. I want to say Melbourne, but I could be
Yeah.
wrong.
That's where I am
Yeah.
now. But Melbourne was
Okay.
like the worst. They had like full like they couldn't go out in certain times. It was really bad here. But I was in Queensland at the time, which was like it's very
Mhm.
beachy, tropical, family lifestyle vibes up there. So no one gave a shit and everyone was just doing what they wanted, but we just didn't have as like bad of like rules up there.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to be locked in a place with borders, better to be next to the ocean than be in the middle of the country, right? So you lucked
100%.
out there.
Yeah, I lived in the bush, but the beach was like 20 minutes away. So I had the best of both worlds.
Nice.
Yeah, it was gorgeous.
Okay, so the next question is, what's your favorite part about being human?
Probably like feeling the emotions that we get to feel, which like can be quite challenging sometimes as well. But I think just being able to experience the full spectrum of like fucking ecstatic joy and ecstasy to like grief and the depths of hell, which I've definitely been processing quite a lot of that lately. But just being able to like play in that, experience all of that.
Yeah. And that can be so liberating because
Yes,
we're not normally told that it's like okay to go and explore the depths of our emotions. We're told that like certain emotions are bad, certain emotions are
totally.
good, which I
Yeah,
think could have like big parallels with the whole conversation of like what's masculine and feminine, because it's like again boxing our expression into certain places of like positive vibes only.
oh my God, I know. And like how taxing that can be on the body too. Like you're just pushing it all down, and then one day it will just blow up.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay, so one more question and then I will ask where people can find you. Um, and as I come to share this question, I want to share with you that this is the question that I've been asking for like a year and a half to every one of my guests. And with the conversation that we've had, I'm just like, I'm wondering like what it means for this question and if this is the last time I will ask it, or like how to even like, yeah, so I'll share the question with you, and maybe before you answer you can share like how that question lands in regards to our conversation.
Great.
Sound good? Okay. So the question I usually ask is, what's your favorite part about being a woman?
I love that. I'm still, it's so funny. There's like a poster behind my computer that says woman, like as I'm looked up, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Um, I think I'm still kind of like unraveling what that looks like to me. Like I know that there's like the biological aspects of like man and woman, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
still not fully decided on like how that feels in my system. I still obviously like
Yeah.
identify as a woman, I guess, but I don't like necessarily feel like I need to, if that makes sense. So I'm kind of
Mm.
neutral to that question.
Yeah.
I feel like you could still keep asking that though. Like I feel like obviously everybody's at different stages, and maybe that will trigger more conversations like what we've had in this podcast as well. Like it's still quite an open, thought-provoking question for whoever you ask it, right? Like even if you asked a trans woman that, like they're gonna have a completely unique answer.
That's true. Yeah. And it's not like I'm saying like this is what a woman is. Now, what's your favorite part
No,
about it?
no, exactly. It's open to interpretation.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for that, because like it is very important to me to be inclusive. And at the same time, it's also very important to me to like identify as a woman, and I really want to be a kind of like lighthouse to, I don't want to say the word empower because I hate that word, but to like liberate and be a stand for women. And I really look up to people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who did so much for women in America. I don't know if she's known in your part of the world, but she basically like was able to give women more rights within the Supreme Court laws by going after small cases where that made small decisions that could lead to bigger decisions. Like, she was very smart about it. And my cat is named after her.
Cute.
So yeah, we found my cat like right after Ruth Bader Ginsburg had passed away. So like, it really is important to me to like, and for my brand to be this stand for women, and at the same time hold the inclusivity and to not define what a woman is.
Yeah, I love
like
that.
I believe trans women are women too. So
Totally. And like, perhaps, you know, if you did have somebody on the podcast that maybe identified as like gender neutral or non-binary, maybe frame it like you did for me at the start and just say, I just want to hear what comes up for you when I say this. And like, or instead of using the word woman, what would you like me to use? Like, this is how we're going to evolve, you know, and grow, is like by understanding their perspectives.
Yeah. I think that's also why the question I asked you before, what's your favorite part about being human? That's a pretty new question. You're only like the 5th person I've asked, because I think it's with the work in Vita, I've decided like, you know, I want to know what your favorite part is about being alive in general, like not specific to being a woman. I'm curious. I want to know. Yeah.
Yeah. I will answer it though. Like, my favorite part about being a woman is like the curvaceous body that I've been gifted, I feel. And I don't always love it, but I think like, as far as like the biological bodies of a man and a woman, like, I think that really is like so beautiful and like different and unique compared to like a man's body.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be my answer.
I love that answer because no one's ever said that before.
Great.
Love it. So for the people who have tuned in, who are curious about you and your work and want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Probably Instagram's where I'm like most active. My handle is I am Caitlin Rose. I'll spell Caitlin because there's a million ways to spell that. CAITLIN _ at the end of that.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Openly Spoken. I know that there's an abundance of content online, so I really appreciate you giving me your ears today. If this episode shifted something for you, please share this with a friend and/or write us a podcast review if you're listening to this on iTunes so that more people can find this. If anything shifted for you from this episode that you want to have a conversation about, I would love to hear from you. Just send me a DM over on Instagram at selfexpressbabe, and that is in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.